Hi guys, it's Adria. So today's video is going to be something I've wanted to talk about for a while, and that is jobs and social anxiety. So I make a lot of videos revolved around mental health. So as some of you may know, I struggle a bit with social anxiety. Parties, going out, shopping, the mall, just anything. Anything involving people. Basically, from the minute I leave confined spaces like my apartment, I deal with anxiety. So I've wanted to talk about jobs and working outside of your house if you struggle with social anxiety. First of all, I would just like to say it is 100% doable. It's not impossible. I used to have this thought process that I thought that because I felt the way I did and interacting with people was so hard, I kind of convinced myself that it was impossible for me to have a job. And not to say I didn't want a job, not to say I didn't want to be working, and not to say I didn't want to conquer my anxiety, but I just felt like it impaired me to a degree. And if you get anxious around people and talking and making eye contact, you can totally relate, because pretty much every single job involves talking to people. And no matter what you do, you're gonna have to talk to people. You're gonna have to have an employer. Even if you're a dishwasher and you don't necessarily have to talk to customers or the public, you're still gonna have to talk to your coworkers and your employer. So no matter what, when you work, it involves socialization. So I'm gonna give you guys some tips and tricks for working and having a job when you have social anxiety. I would recommend somewhere quiet, and that's obvious. I know some people don't like the quiet. I know sometimes for me, I feel more comfortable when it's loud because I feel like people aren't like paying attention to me. Sometimes I'm more anxious when there's not something going on. I personally would rather go to a party with 100 people than a small gathering in somebody's house with like 5 people. If that makes any kind of sense. You know, sometimes it's just easier for me to not have such a small amount of people because it makes it less revolved around me in a sense, because I don't really like being in a spotlight. I don't like to feel like people are gonna talk to me, you know. So a lot of my social anxiety is like triggered by loud noises in social situations, you know. So, but then again, I'm weird and I'm the person that would rather go to a party with 100 people than a party with 5 people. If there's 100 people in the room, I can fly under the radar. I don't have to talk, whatever, it's fine. So more quiet places like grocery stores, yeah, grocery stores are actually fairly quiet. Places with music playing, that can be really nice, you know, like that personally is comforting to me. You know, stores like Target. Target is not that loud. You know, you might feel like on a Saturday when there's tons of people in there, it's pretty loud, but if you go into a Target on like a weekday afternoon, it's really quiet in there. Probably the top place that I would love to work personally would be like a bookstore or like a craft store or like a library or something like that. Just places where it doesn't attract a crowd necessarily. Places like restaurants and bars that attract a crowd on like a Friday night. People aren't swarming to the craft store on like a Friday night, not that I know of. But for me, even places like Home Depot, I feel so relaxed when I'm in Home Depot. I don't know about you guys, but like the smell of like fresh home supplies, it's like, oh my gosh. So you really just gotta find what works for you. You know, like what places do you enjoy going to? Craft stores, like I said, Home Depot, grocery stores, I don't really mind going to. Places like that, but where are places that you feel more anxious? Right now, as of right now, I work in a restaurant. The restaurant I work at is fairly loud. There's a bar, and it's just like, it can get really, really loud, and sometimes I'm just like, sensory overload, I want to go home. That brings me to my next point, is to avoid places that you feel really anxious at. Obviously, you know, don't work somewhere that makes you feel super anxious. Restaurants, serving, especially serving, is probably one of the worst things you can do if you have social anxiety. That's not to say you can't do it. That's not to say you shouldn't do it. You know, servers make good money. I do some serving sometimes, and with having social anxiety, it's kind of hard to serve on certain days. You know, some days are worse than others. Some days I'm just like, yeah, I'm fine, whatever, I'll do it. But on other days, I'm just like, oh my gosh, don't look me in the eye. It is possible. Serving and restaurants are definitely possible with social anxiety. You know, restaurant was my first job, really. You know, if you want to do it, absolutely. If working in a restaurant sounds like a good deal to you, definitely try it. But as somebody that knows the ins and outs of social anxiety, just from working in a restaurant, it's so bad. Like, I literally need a day of recovery after I work, because I just, like, it feels like a hangover. It literally feels like I'm hungover after I work because I'm just so like overstimulated. There's just so much, like all the people I've had to talk to, all the faces I've seen, all the questions I've been asked, all the orders I've taken. You know, it's just like, oh, so much at once. I'm like a computer with, you know, smoke coming out of me, whatever. As far as coping goes, I feel like the more you expose yourself to things, the easier it gets. When I first started working, the restaurant that I work at was just opening for the first time. So they were doing like an orientation week, a training week, and that was super beneficial for me because I didn't have to really be exposed to customers. It was kind of just a matter of learning the menu, getting to know my coworkers, just the ins and outs of my job and all that stuff. And that was really kind of nice. And I feel like most jobs will do that if you've never worked in that field before. And I really feel like the training period is really like easing your way into it. You know, once you get past the training, it's like, okay, this is easy. This is easy. Social anxiety in job interviews is probably, oh my gosh, if you can make it past the interview, home run. It's all clear from there. You're good. You're good. For me, interviews were always the hardest part. When I was a bit younger and not really that in control of my social anxiety, I would go to a job interview and then after that I would just panic and freak out. The interview made me feel like that's how I was gonna feel if I worked at that job. The interview is the worst part. The interview is the worst part, okay? If you are super anxious about a job interview, once that interview is over, it's all rainbows and butterflies from here, sweetheart, because the interview is the worst part. You know, it's you and one other person, one-on-one, answering questions about yourself. That's awful. That is awful. Breathe. Just breathe. And for me, I just did my best to try to mask how I actually felt, and I would, you know, make eye contact. I just kept my eye contact. Oh my gosh, I would get so sweaty in job interviews, oh my lord. Once you're in that interview room, like, there's no turning back. You're there. You're there. It's just a matter of getting there, and I know that's like the hardest part for people with anxiety. It's just getting there. Once you're in that room, everything will just happen. You don't need to have all the answers planned in your head. Go with the flow. Just answer the questions as best you can. Try not to let them see you sweating. You'll be okay. Some good positions for people with anxiety: dishwasher, stocking, carts, the people that organize the carts, bagging at the grocery store, be a bagger. There's lots of job alternatives where you're not completely in the spotlight. There's probably more jobs that I'm not thinking of at the moment, but there's tons of jobs where you don't have to do a whole lot of talking. But I know for me personally, the exposure to having to talk to get paid has kind of brought me out of my shell a little bit. Like for me, a lot of my social anxiety revolved around the phone. Like to this day, I don't really like making phone calls, but if I have to make a phone call, I will make a phone call. My job involved me answering the phone to take to-go orders, and when I first started working, I avoided the phone like the plague. They had like at least 5 hostesses on at a time, so chances are one of the other hosts would get it. But then as we started cutting down on employees, like if it was like an afternoon and there was only 2 hosts there, I might end up having to answer the phone. So, but for me, it became a good thing because it taught me to, you know, just do it. I gotta do it or I don't get paid. If I don't do it, I'll lose my job. Kind of knowing that you have to do it for your job is like motivation in a sense to push you to do it. Can you hear that guy weed whacking? Really? He is literally standing on my porch drinking a water bottle. Are you kidding me right now? So now I don't even remember where I was because I went and I FaceTimed my Nana because she FaceTimed me in the middle of the video, but I don't really remember where I was. I think I was talking about the phone, how the exposure to it kind of helped, but again, I feel like no matter what job you get, you know, maybe you have social anxiety, maybe your parents are like hounding you for a job and stuff like that, or, you know, maybe you're an adult and you live on your own and it's like, I have to work no matter what, so you can't really be picky about where you work. I feel like no matter where you end up working, social anxiety won't destroy your chances of doing that job successfully, no matter what it is. It's not like, oh, I have social anxiety, so I can't work here, and here. No, it's not really about that. It's more about, you know, no matter where you work, making it work. Something that I think is really important is to be open and honest with your employer about what you deal with, especially if you're medicated for it. If you like switch medications or your dose changes, you know, it might affect your ability to work. So I would just make sure your employer is aware of it. That's not to say every time you come into work to be like, oh, I'm so anxious today. Oh, I was so anxious yesterday. No, it's not to say to talk about it all the time, but it's like, hey, when you first start working somewhere, just maybe bring it up. Be like, hey, you know, I struggle with a bit of anxiety. I want to work and I'm gonna do my job to the best of my ability. That's important. And I feel like people are understanding of that, especially if you just come out and say it, you know, because I feel like people wonder why I am the way I am, why I'm like quiet and stuff like that. And it's like, hey, if you just tell them that you struggle like with anxiety, that's like what I do. When people ask me why I'm so quiet, why I don't do this, why I don't whatever. And it's like, you know, people, they don't always understand it, but they're for the most part compassionate of it, and you know, they're aware of its existence, and just like, oh, okay. I hid it from people, and you know, I would say like, oh, I don't feel well today, I had a fever yesterday, I'm sick, whatever. It's just important to be honest with people. I feel like people are understanding for the most part. Customers, oh my gosh, I feel like it's hard when you interact with somebody for just such a slight sliver of your day to understand why they may have acted the way they did. I know there have been times where I was like feeling really off and probably didn't give the best customer service that I probably could have. And you know, that's hard, especially when you're aware of it. You know, sometimes I'll be like, oh, like I didn't make right eye contact with them, or I don't think I smiled enough to them. You know, there's little things like that that I'm kind of nitpicky about with myself, because I always try to smile and make eye contact with people and be as polite as I can, but sometimes like anxiety is just like, I don't want to be here right now, and I feel like that's written all over my face. As far as that goes, on days where I'm more anxious, I'm a bit more reserved. I try not to come across in like a closed off, rude, because I know it can be taken that way, but if you work around customers and you are having just an off day, I know it can be misinterpreted, but just do your absolute best to just smile. And I know that's super hard, but for me, eye contact is the hardest when I'm anxious. I can fake smile all day, every day, but I feel like as long as you smile to people, you know, on days where I'm not anxious, I am more like talkative to customers, and like I make them laugh sometimes, like I crack jokes and stuff. But then on days where I'm more off, I just kind of do the standard thing, what I have to do, like, hi, how are you? I don't really go outside of, you know, what I have to do. I say for the most part, as long as you do what is inside of your job title, you know, like that's fine. But you know, just know that it's okay to have an off day. You made it to work. That's what I tell myself. If I'm like anxious at work, I'm like, hey, at least I made it here today. At least I made it here today. You kind of get good at hiding anxiety at work in public. You get good at it, and you kind of learn your own ways to act that makes it seem like you're fine. But yeah, I guess that's really it. My best advice is an overall, you know, maybe you're young and you're like just thinking about getting a job, but you struggle a bit with social anxiety. My best advice is just jump right in, because I feel like it's like ripping off a band-aid. Just do it as fast as you can, because you know, your brain won't have time to convince yourself that this is a bad idea. Just do it. Just do it! I could never picture myself, you know, serving tables. If you think about it, like waiters and waitresses kind of have one of the hardest jobs socially, because you're walking up to complete strangers and interacting with them. And you know, this is like my worst nightmare, but it's like, hey, I do it, and I'm not the best at it, but I'm not the worst at it either. But yeah, that was it for this. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and let me know if you guys have any tips for not even just social anxiety, just anxiety in general. If you have any advice for that, leave it in the comments below. Anything else I didn't cover, if you have any further questions, also leave them in the comments below. I'll be sure to respond to the best of my ability. I will see you guys again real soon. Until then, panda hugs. I love you guys.